Thank you, Pamela. His Excellency Tan Myint, the Minister of Commerce of Myanmar, Mr. Jeffrey Hadi, the Director General of Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, Your Excellencies, representatives of different international stakeholders and United Nations organizations, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of UNCTAD, I would like to bid you all welcome to this, what I consider the first interagency all-sector forum, stakeholder forum on illicit trade. I want to thank those of you who, from your first meeting together in July last year, coordinated and continued the promise to try to put together an event that talks to a shared challenge, a challenge that most of us present here have been dealing with, but on the basis of specific sectors. But for the first time, we have an inclusive forum at which we bring the different voices together and we talk to an agenda that cannot be resolved, cannot make progress until and unless all the different sectors are working together on a shared agenda with a shared timed program of interventions. I want to particularly express my appreciation to you, Mr. Hadi, for the passion you have brought to this. From the discussions you and I had in Dubai a year and a half ago, to the meeting that you had with some of our members of staff in UNCTAD, and to the mobilization for the participation in this event. As you know, we are dealing with a phenomenon that has been with us for some time, but is not being directly related to a shared agenda, which is that without being able to come to terms with the illicit trade, we cannot realize the aspirations of Agenda 2030. That the cost to economy, to livelihoods, to the environment of the different facets of illicit trade is too overwhelming to be ignored in the context of seeking a decade of action on Agenda 2030. In a few moments, Pamela will lead you through some of the statistics, the diversity of the challenge, and the immensity of the problem. From the outset, I'd like to say that in our convening this meeting, we're aware of the critical importance of illicit financial flows, but we are leaving that aside as a complementary angle of dealing with illicit movement. We at UNCTAD do work on illicit financial flows, together with Norway and Nigeria, particularly now in its presidency of the General Assembly. We are working towards a high-level event, preferably summit level, on illicit financial flows. But we see the work on illicit trade as an important complement to the work on illicit financial flows. Today, we have a number of challenges. Challenges at company level behavior, challenges to enterprise, challenges to governments, challenges to consumers, and challenges to our ecosystem connected to different facets of illicit trade. Whether it is logging, valued up to $150 billion, which represents the worst natural resource crime in the world happening today, to counterfeiting and piracy, easily closing in on 2.5% of world trade value. It is therefore important that we find ways to contribute to states receiving their due taxes, that society is getting the rightful employment, that persons who are meaningfully dying because of adulterated drugs and counterfeit drugs have their lives saved, that our forests and other ecosystem fauna and flora, from wildlife to timber, are protected from the adulterous behavior of illicit trade. We at UNCTAD commit to the member states and to the other stakeholders that using our convening power, We're not only interested in the deep discussions being initiated here, but we'll be very glad to see this agenda brought to the fore as we head to UNCTAD 15 and the renewed mandate for our organization from Barbados in October this year. I want to again express our appreciation for those who saw the triple threat in the meeting last year. Express our appreciation to the diversity of sectors represented here, and express our fidelity to the challenges and goals that you are setting out, dealing with the impact of illicit trade on SDGs, on the shape and size of illicit trade, on its impact on private and public life, and the role of the private and public sectors in combating it, and in ensuring that we find complementarity with other issues like illicit financial flows. I want to finish off with a very personal experience. My sense that governments have the largest responsibility in the fight against illicit trade. In countries with weak public institutions, many players in public life are actually the perpetrators and beneficiaries of illicit trade. Many years ago, I was a trade minister, and I intercepted and destroyed counterfeit products being smuggled into the country. And after I'd burnt in a public function, I discovered that some colleagues high in government were behind the illicit trade. Similarly, sometimes government policies inadvertently facilitate illicit trade. In my country, we initiated an effort to encourage the largest brewery in the country to make a low-cost, sorghum-based beer, clean, tested beer, on which we'll levy very, very minimal taxes in order to encourage the citizens to get off illicit bootlegging and go into this low-cost beer. And it succeeded like a miracle, creating employment for more than 20,000 people and livelihoods for more than 50,000 families that were producing sorghum directly to the brewery. When the next government came after us, they saw this was a holy cow. They increased tax on that beer. And what happened is the production collapsed, and people went back into distilleries of illicit stuffs, leading to a lot of livelihood, painful experiences. So we look at both sides, that the government is a beneficiary of fighting illicit trade, and government action sometimes is a major enabler for illicit trade. Thank you very much.
You know, I wanted to start my remarks really by expressing how grateful I was that the Secretary General himself had hosted this forum. I mean, I think that this is a monumental demonstration of leadership. And in many ways, it's very much a groundbreaking step to raise awareness among all the government officials that are here today, the trade experts, and really the UN community here in Geneva. Because I truly think that awareness can drive change. In fact, the reason that we formed the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, first off, was to fight illicit trade across sectors, but how are we going to do that? And it starts with raising awareness. Because the more aware that we are about the harms or the evils of illicit trade, the more committed we can be to stopping it. Let's start with my own self and my staff at TRACIT. The more we learn about, for example, people that are dying from toxic illicit alcohol, the more driven we are to find solutions. The more we hear about falsified or counterfeit medicines that rob sick people of their ability to heal, the more we know that we have a responsibility. And the more we find out about consumer fraud in everyday products, such as those we trust to wash our hair or brush our teeth, the more driven we are to find ways to stop illicit trade. And it really makes you stop and think, what about illicit fishing, the Secretary General mentioned, or illicit logging, or illicit mining, or forced labor and human trafficking? These activities cause irreversible environmental degradation. They cause indelible human rights abuses, and they rob countries of their opportunities for real economic development. I know how this makes me feel, and so I ask, how about you? I hope that this type of story makes you want to find a solution. I hope that this kind of story makes you want to collaborate with us to implement these solutions. Just like human rights or environmental stewardship, illicit trade is a transnational challenge. So we must all be grateful to Dr. Kituyi, to UNCTAD for bringing us together, for prioritizing illicit trade, and for giving us an opportunity to start shaping a future where sustainable development is not hijacked by illicit trade. So, what I'd like to do with the next few minutes is I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the relationship between illicit trade and the Sustainable Development Goals. But first, I want to give you a couple of reasons why I'm here today and why the business community is here today. Because TRACIT is a business-led organization. It's a member trade association, and businesses that are vulnerable to illicit trade comprise our members. So if you take away the social externalities of illicit trade, quite simply, this is a form of unfair, illegal competition that chokes off sales of legitimate products to legitimate companies. So to the many businesses that are vulnerable to illicit trade, this means lost markets, it means limited growth, and it means lower productivity. So what's that mean to the surrounding communities? To the communities, this means lower wages, this means fewer jobs, and this means less taxes that are paid to the governments. All elements of sustainable development. These businesses also suffer when their consumers suffer. And they suffer when they're exposed to fake products, substandard products, falsified products that are fraudulent, ineffective, and even harmful. So, as a business, a voice of business, we work hard to create, to deliver clean, safe, trustworthy products. So, the presence of illicit trade to us is simply unacceptable. The second reason that business is committed is that we are a committed partner in the march toward achieving sustainable development. In fact, there are already 9,000 companies that are participating in the UN's Global Compact in 160 countries worldwide. They're already working to incorporate responsible practices and the SDGs into their core business strategies. So, fighting illicit trade and eliminating its negative impact on sustainable development is part of this overall commitment. I'd like to now turn briefly to a few points about illicit trade and sustainable development, which I think is the core of our meeting and the subject primarily of the following panels. Since we published the Global Illicit Trade Index almost 2 years ago, myself and my team have visited dozens of countries, speaking with government officials about what works and what needs to be improved in their countries to fight illicit trade. And most of the time, we were hearing very similar messages from energy ministers, from finance ministers, from trade ministers, from customs officials, and whether that was a conference on counterfeiting or petroleum or pharmaceuticals, the messages were the same. They were all telling us that illicit trade led to massive drains on their economy, lost job opportunities, lost tax revenues, squandered natural resources, the flight of financial capital, environmental damages. What does this sound like to you? To me, that sounded a lot like the Sustainable Development Goals. That sounded a lot like the challenges that we and the UN are trying to do with the 2030 Agenda. So we did some research and we looked into this relationship between illicit trade and sustainable development. The result of that was a publication that we released here in Geneva last summer. It's called the Mapping the Impact of Illicit Trade on the Sustainable Development Goals. Good title, right? And in that report, we asked 3 questions. Does illicit trade impact all of the goals? Are the impacts interconnected? And are developing countries more adversely impacted? And not surprisingly, the answer to all 3 of those questions is yes. And we heard the Secretary General, in fact, mention in his opening remarks about the pervasive impact of illicit trade on all 17 of the goals. In this area, what we found is that there were notable macro impacts where the illicit trade cut across many of the goals that are undermining achievement for poverty reduction, for decent work opportunities, for economic growth. These were SDGs 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8 for all of those of you who've memorized all 17 of the goals. We also found specific cases, for example, where illegal logging destroys the carbon sink capacity of forests. This obviously restricts the achievement of SDG 13, which is to fight climate change. Another one that we discovered, and which we're probably going to hear a lot about today, is illicit wildlife trade is almost entirely responsible for pushing some of the world's species to the brink of extinction. And this undermines goal SDG 15 to preserve life on land. It's notable that we found that 2 of the goals are impacted by all of the sector of illicit trade. All of the all types of illicit trade threaten economic growth and significantly hinder achievement of SDG 8. And illicit trade in all of its forms stands in direct conflict with SDG 16 by feeding violence, breeding corruption, undermining trust in institutions, the rule of law, and generating enormous illicit financial flows. The second question that we asked is, are they interconnected in any way? And I have 2 examples to share. Medicines, for example, with no active ingredient, and toxic illicit alcohol set back progress on goals for good health and well-being, SDG number 3. We also found, for example, food fraud, commodity smuggling, illegal agrochemicals and pesticides undermine sustainable farming, limit crop yields, jeopardize the delivery of fair, safe, and sustainable food supplies, which slows progress on SDG 2 and our goal for zero hunger. And lastly, we asked, are the developing countries more adversely impacted? And yes, that was clearly the case. The alarming consequences of illicit trade are especially evident in developing countries where they are hard-pressed already to monetize resources, commercialize innovation, attract investment, establish lasting job opportunities, and create genuine long-term economic growth. Now, I'm working my way towards some conclusions that I wanted to share with you. So there are 2 or 3 main conclusions that we've drawn from all of this. And the first is that there is an enduring need for the member states to strengthen their defense against illicit trade. And in our view, the sweeping negative impacts of illicit trade call for some form of institutional leadership. We think leadership is needed to help address the overlapping problems related to the multiple forms of illicit trade that I just explained. There's leadership is needed to link existing initiatives that exist throughout the UN community and the different agencies. Leadership is needed to streamline the guidance and the capacity support to the member states. And I think many of you very sympathetic to this. There are a lot of agencies that provide national capitals with guidance, with tools, with resources. And is there a way that we can streamline and coordinate that flow of information that's so valuable? So let's look at those 3 suggestions in the context of some things that are already going on. In Africa, there are 7 leaders from the Republic of Congo, Gambia, Ghana, Niger, Senegal, Togo, and Uganda that are collaborating currently to criminalize the sale of counterfeit medicines. So this is a step in the right direction, and I think this is an area where institutional leadership can help. It can help strengthen the cooperation between these governments that are working together already, and it can encourage other African nations to join into this initiative. So again, there's a role for an organization like an UNCTAD to bring its member states together where they're already working. Another example is China recently amended its forest law to include a ban on buying and processing illegally sourced timber. Now, this is terrific progress by one of the member states, but this is also an area where institutional leadership can help by pressing support from the international community and the source countries of these illicit logging to abide by those laws and provide any sort of capacity building or strength to make sure that what China is doing becomes fully implemented. Another example is that Kenya had created an interagency anti-illicit trade executive forum. Now, this was designed to synchronize all of the institutional enforcement and public awareness initiatives in the country. Similarly, on the other side of the world, the Vice President of Myanmar had just established the Illegal Trade Eradication Steering Committee, which I know we're going to hear more about in a few minutes, which assigned 13 tasks to the different agencies in Myanmar. And I think both of these initiatives by these two national governments are an area where institutional leadership, again, can help by sharing the guidelines and the best practices that we can gather from all the different countries and share back to those who are willing to take action now. Finally, I wanted to say that perhaps all of this might be achieved by creating a unifying framework that can galvanize the political will of government officials that are taking steps to fight illicit trade now. Maybe a framework that can drive better collaboration and coordination, and maybe create a mechanism to work with the member states to evaluate your needs, to identify areas that need greater attention, and to formulate effective anti-trade strategies. I think to do so, we're going to need to dig deeper and learn more from the national governments about their experiences, about their challenges, their priorities, and their needs for assistance. And I think that this forum certainly is an important and essential step in this process, and I look forward to all of your contributions over the next 2 days.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased and honored to be with you this morning at the opening of Illicit Trade Forum, which is very significant and meaningful event in the global context. So I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the UNCTAD and the Transnational Alliance to combat illicit trade, TRACIT, for organizing this event and extending the invitation to Myanmar delegation. As we are all aware, cross-border trade has expanded significantly in the last few decades, raising living standards of people across the globe. However, this rapid growth in trade has been accompanied by significant growth in illicit trade, which causes negative impact to those relevant countries, and Myanmar is not an exception. Myanmar has over 6,500 kilometers of total land border, which is adjacent to the 5 neighboring countries, altogether with very long coastal line or sea coast. Due to long border line, weak in peace and security in some part of the border area, and needs of institutional capacity, Myanmar finds difficulty in controlling illicit trade effectively. Myanmar confronts illicit trade in many sectors, as mentioned in the Secretary General's speech and Mr. Jarihavi's explanation, including wildlife trafficking, smuggling salt, alcohol, and tobacco, and illegal logging, illicit fishing and mining, illegal imports, particularly substandard goods, fake or unregistered medicine, unsafe foodstuffs, and dangerous goods, having threatened people's health and safety in all aspects of my country. It has been threatening the existence of small and medium enterprises (SME), apart from depriving government's revenues for investment in vital public services. It also had a detrimental impact on economic in terms of foreign investment, job creations, and market competition. Ladies and gentlemen, Myanmar is home to 53 million people, and it has been promoted all-round development of its national economy by implementing Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan (MSDP), which also aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal (SDG). In spite of our best efforts, illegal trade has been the main obstacle hindering Myanmar's economic development. In order to tackle illicit trade issue more effectively and efficiently, our government formed illegal trade eradication steering committee on 25th June 2019. The committee consists of 39 members, and it is headed by Vice Presidents of the Republic of Myanmar. The committee has been assigned to 13 tasks with a view to combat illicit trade effectively. The problem of illicit trade in Myanmar is only the tip of an iceberg. Hence, this is much need for exchange of ideas and experience between the government, the public, and international organizations, and very interested groups and regional groups. Therefore, the roles of UNCTAD and TRACIT is significant to assist a country like Myanmar fight illicit trade. We hope that UNCTAD and TRACIT can play an important role to help coordinate resources, share experience, establish guidelines, and promote international enforcement cooperation among the UN member states and regional groups. We also view that business perspectives very significant in the fight against illicit trade. We highly appreciate Eurochan Myanmar, which helped us raise awareness of the issue surrounding illicit trade in Myanmar. Currently, with the guidance of illicit trade eradication steering committee, all stakeholders, particularly government and private agencies, have been working closely to strict control of illicit trade. We still have many challenges to combat illicit trade. We need to upgrade our institutional capacity, border control facility, and infrastructure development. We are also trying to further strengthen stakeholder cooperation and coordination among government agencies as well as international cooperation. Our government has strong political will to fight against illicit trade for the benefits of people. We will work closely and constructively with UNCTAD and TRACIT and all interested development partners, donors to eradicate illicit trade in Myanmar. In conclusion, I would like to thank again to Dr. Mukhisa, Kituyi, General Secretary of UNCTAD, and Mr. J.B. Harry, Director General Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, TRACIT, for their leadership in convening this event, and also extend the excellent arrangement and hospitality to Myanmar delegation. Thank you all.